Welcome back. You're watching Business Morning on Channels Television. Of course, the conversation is on the stage of the economy. A slew of data from the National Bureau of Statistics today show that officially Nigeria is in recession, and we're seeing inflation at 17.1%, up 0.6%. Jobs for the period is at 79,469, but unemployment rate rose in the second quarter to 19.3%. GDP contracted 2.06%. But in spite of these blistering numbers, we've got a press statement from the Office of the Vice President this morning, of course, just about some minutes after the National Bureau of Statistics released the result. This is the first time we're seeing such quick and prompt response. But the federal government expects better economic outlook for the second half of 2016 because of further growth in the agri and solid minerals sector. The agriculture sector grew about 4.53% in the second quarter of 2016, and we saw the metal ore sector showing similar performance and improving by over 2.5%. But let's talk to Tilewa Adebajo as we take a look at, of course, the federal government has put in place some policies and talking about some initiatives. Last week at the Federal Executive Council meeting, the 2017-2019 medium-term expenditure framework financial spending plan was actually approved by the president. So we're taking a look at how that will actually work. Is it conservative or realistic in terms of these numbers that we see coming out? The presidency says that the second half of the year is looking very bright. But Tilewa Adebajo joins me now to give us his thoughts on this. Tilewa, good morning to you. Thank you for joining me on the program this morning.
Good morning, Harriet. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. It's actually a very fast-paced morning for me, so you'll forgive me if I seem a little out of breath. Because even though we're expecting that these numbers were going to look as blistering as they already, are looking, we actually think that we're going to get as much reactions. But just quickly tell us, what do you make of these numbers? GDP at minus 2.06%, inflation at 17.1%. We have unemployment rate also trending high.
Well, one of the things I need to say very quickly is that I think we need to get back to some of the old clips from Channels Television. And I think that, part of my own frustration is the fact that I think over a year ago, I think we've talked about what we needed to do to ensure that this economy did not go into a recession. But, and despite all the things that we said and all the analysis, many guests have come on Channels Television, different programs. We've done a lot of analysis on this program, on other programs on Channels Television, profiling ideas, talking about these things. But despite all this, I think it's a shame that we've come to a situation whereby we're in a recession. Now that we're in a recession, I think it's clear now what we need to do. The stimulus package that we've talked about, I think we have to get government to ensure that the budget that has been planned and the funds that they want to raise to stimulate the economy, I think they need to double up on that. First of all, to ensure that they're doing the spending to be able to at least begin to stabilize this recession and stem the tide of growth. So I think that's the most important thing right now, to be able to ensure that the budget that has been passed and the funds that need to be released in the system should be done as soon as possible.
So how do you think, now that already these numbers officially are on ground, and let me just quickly read what, apart from that statement from the Vice President's office, the Buhari presidency will continue to work diligently on the economy and engage with all stakeholders to ensure that beneficial policy initiatives are actually pursued and the dividends delivered to the Nigerian people. Taking a look at the medium-term expenditure framework and the proposal for 2017, we see the benchmark oil price of $42.50 per barrel, production output of 2.2 million barrels per day, and exchange rate of 290 naira to a dollar. Is that realistic now, considering that we're trying to grow the economy out of recession?
Fine. With all due respects to most of those statements that have been said, my own concern is not about these statements. My concern at the moment now, from a personal perspective, having watched this whole process unfold, is I'm not too worried about this medium-term economic framework. It's a statutory requirement by law. But what it does is that it signals that the government is already on course to be able to start planning the budget for next year. So these are all statutory administrative issues that need to be done. And I think it was quite pleasing that the Minister of Budget and Planning engaged the private sector on the 4th of August here in Lagos to be able to get inputs into that framework. So what it just tells us is that the government they need to be very serious on making sure that the budget for next year is ready on time. And I think that is the signal we're seeing by this medium-term economic framework. There's nothing wrong with the projections they've made, and I think I don't have a problem with that. The main concern right now is the coordination of the economy to restore confidence. We have problem of confidence not only from business people, we have crisis of confidence from investors and foreign investors alike. It's amusing that the Central Bank of Nigeria has been trying so hard to attract foreign investors into this country, into their bond markets. But I have also maintained the fact that the Central Bank of Nigeria should focus their efforts on restoring Nigeria back onto the JP Morgan index. The attitude when Nigeria was taken out of that index was not very positive. Now we're seeing the consequences. And the only sure way to get foreign investors back into this country is to ensure that we go back on the JP Morgan bond index. Once you're back on the index, you don't need to talk to any portfolio manager. They know that Nigeria is okay to come in to do business. That's number one. Number two, I think there is need for more. How do you now restore that confidence, both for business and investor confidence? What I see again is the articulation of policy. I'm very pleased that the Vice President's office, who are now leading the economic management, has at least responded to those numbers. But they need to back those response with clearly articulated plans, constructive plans that shows that by the end of the year we would be in positive. But I do not see this economy growing this year at all. I think we're going to end this year on a negative. And I think we should accept that, cut our losses and begin to plan for next year.
Even though we've seen, you also mentioned it, emphasis on capital expenditure, they're hoping that that will begin to yield results because there's been disbursement in terms of improving concentration on capital projects, and most economies are actually projecting by the fourth quarter of the year, we're almost into the fourth quarter of the year, we should begin to see some sort of stability in the economy.
Well, Harriet, you see, what people don't understand with the economy is that they're leading indicators and they're lagging indicators. The results that we're seeing today are as a result of actions that we have made some time back. Those actions that are being done now, you are not going to see those results until probably the end of the first quarter next year. So all this stimulus that you're talking about, that result will start yielding by first quarter next year. So what is important is that within the last quarter of this year, we're already in September. So what the government needs to do is that they need to stay on policy, they need to stay on song. There needs to be consistency between now and the end of the year to be able to begin to see those results first quarter next year. So they're leading indicators, they're lagging indicators. An economy is not, we've announced the stimulus is there. What I've always maintained is that we need the coordination. I've said this many times before, and I don't think we're going to miss it. The actions of the central bank by increasing rates, I think, is going to stall growth. There's no question about that. The inflation that we've talked about, as we've said, is not demand push inflation. It is cost related on production factors. So now that you've increased interest rates, who is going to be able to borrow at those rates to be able to grow the economy? Very few people. You're only going to increase the rate of default within the banking system, which we're seeing. So What I would like to see, and I think the government needs to stay on some, which they're doing, all the policies, the stimulus packages, but right now we have a misalignment between monetary policy and fiscal policy. So they need to bring that into alignment very quickly to sustain a lot of all these policies that has been preferred. And it's important that there is now coordination, which I think the Vice President's office is leading. And I think I would like to see more articulation on that coordination. And it's important that both the Central Bank Governor, the Federal Ministry of Finance, the Federal Ministry of Budget and Planning, and the Federal Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investments, there's a need for a lot of coordination between all those agencies. Now, within the Debt Management Office, there's supposed to be a monetary and fiscal policy committee to be able to look at alignment. I don't know if that committee has been meeting on a regular basis, but and that involves both the Debt Management Office officials, Central Bank officials, presidency officials, and the Central Bank to be able to sit down on a regular basis to harmonize monetary and fiscal policy. I don't know when last that committee met. I've checked the DMO website and I've not seen any reports on that meeting. That committee needs to also meet urgently because the situation, to be honest with you, is not, if you talk to people on the streets, it's not very funny. All my clients I've talked to, all the people I work to have laid off workers. They're struggling. They can't get they can't get any raw materials. Lots of layoffs, and as you can see, the employment figures we're talking about has not reflected the sort of layoffs that we're seeing.
Unemployment rate is actually up to 19.3% for the second quarter.
Yes.
So, in line with what you've just said, how do you think we should proceed? Because it's very important that at this time, they're planning the 2017 budget.
Yes.
And we have already some parameters that we're looking at for the oil, for exchange rate, for debt servicing, for borrowing and the rest of it. How do you think they should proceed now? What do you think is going to happen next? What do you think should happen next?
Well, I think, like I said, it's a positive signal that the medium-term economic framework is already in place, and what should now follow will now be the budget process. So it's time for the government to take stock. Where are we? We're now planning last year's budget. What can we realistically accomplish between now and the end of the year? And then how do we start next year? So what it's important for them to do is to maintain the level of consistency in terms of the fiscal stimulus between now and the end of the year, and now begin to look at how they're going to implement the 2017 budget, and then see where they are, see the progress they've made. They've seen these numbers, and before you get numbers at the end of the year, you might not have the benefit of these numbers before you pass your budget to look at because the year-end numbers are not going to be available probably until February, March next year. And your budget will have to be ready before that. So it's important that consistency is maintained. The Vice President needs to be more vocal about the economy. I see he's been visiting a lot of the chambers of commerce, and they've been talking about all these things. They need to step up on that. Confidence, business and economy is about confidence.
Still, talking about the ease of business, because that's one of the major things, the ease of doing business, we're still not ranked favorably. Do you think enough is being done in that direction?
Well, those are other structural issues that you also have to deal with, apart from the fact that you're worrying about your monetary and fiscal policy. There are also major structural issues with the economy, such as the ease of doing business, the infrastructure deficit, a lot of all the other challenges we have in Nigerian power, the power sector, for instance. Those other structural problems also contribute. But at least let's get the basics right, the monetary and the fiscal.
All right. Tiliwa, thank you so much for joining me on the program this morning and sharing your perspectives with us. Tiliwa Adebajo is an economic policy analyst and the CEO of CFG Advisory Services. Business Morning continues in just a moment. Join us again.